I am satisfied that Queen's consent is required and that it has been obtained, as it was signified for the bill in the House of Lords on Wednesday the 1st of July this year. If a Privy Councillor will now signify formally that the Queen's consent was obtained for this bill, I will direct that the appropriate entry be made in the journal for yesterday's proceeding. A Privy Councillor is to signify his Queen's consent. Thank you. Order. Right. Question of Secretary of State for Wales, David Linden.
Number one.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have regular discussions with Welsh ministers on a range of issues, including EU negotiations. The Joint Ministerial Committee on EU negotiation meets regularly, and my Cabinet and ministerial colleagues frequently meet ministers from the devolved administrations.
David Linden.
Speaker, tomorrow is the day that the Prime Minister has set for his deadline for a trade deal with the EU. So far, the devolved administrations have been left out of the loop or deliberately kept in the dark on key details. Does the Secretary of State believe that withholding key information in detail at such a stage as this shows respect or disrespect for the devolved administrations?
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't recognise the accusation that he makes, given the number of meetings that I personally have been in with ministers from the devolved nations, let alone other colleagues. It would be a difficult charge to land to suggest that they haven't been closely involved with the process right from the beginning. And I suspect his comments are really based on the fact that he doesn't like the reality of what's going on rather than has a legitimate comment to make.
First of two questions, Liz Saville-Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Lefarydd. Last week it was revealed that his government had actively sought to conceal information from the Welsh Government. This information included the likelihood of food shortages and their intention to grab new powers. This doesn't sound like intergovernmental parity of esteem. As Secretary of State for Wales, where does his role to represent the Tory party in Wales stop and his role to build trust and mutual respect start?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the first responsibility in this particular context is to respect the fact that 55% of people in Wales voted to leave the European Union. And it seems to me astonishing that the party of Wales, represented by the Honourable Lady, is still so out of step with the people of Wales when it comes to that. The clock is not being turned back, and what we're attempting to do is to deliver a deal which respects that decision and all of the institutions in Wales, which I thought we both valued.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
Our trust, I think, in politicians is sadly diminishing at this time because politicians are not seen to answer the question at hand. But back to the matter of trust. Transmission rates indicate that Wales stands on the brink of a circuit breaker announcement. Businesses in Wales and people who need to self-isolate seek assurance that they can trust the Treasury to back up COVID-19 control measures made in Wales for Wales. Can he guarantee the people of Wales that they can indeed trust his government to do this?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, having seen the Chancellor ensure that Welsh Government has had £4.4 billion worth of UK taxpayers' money for exactly this purpose, I hope that she would actually share my view that we are looking at the UK in the round. This is an international problem, COVID. It doesn't respect political boundaries, and the Chancellor's announcement make it very clear that he sees all of the UK as a priority, not just individual component parts, and I would think the numbers speak for themselves.
For withdrawn, Simon Baines.
Question number 5, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, we have, of course, worked hand in hand with the Welsh Government throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. The Secretary of State for Wales, myself, have regular discussions with Welsh ministers about the ongoing UK-wide response to COVID-19, and those include discussions between the Secretary of State, the First Minister, and of course meetings between the UK Government and all devolved institutions.
Simon Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Restricting the virus is vital, but the Welsh Government's lockdown measures in Clwyd South and the rest of North Wales need reviewing, given the difficulties they're causing, particularly for hospitality, wedding industry and leisure businesses, by using county boundaries rather than being targeted on the specific areas with high COVID case numbers. Would the Minister be able to outline how often the Welsh Government has invited the UK Government to participate in their COVID-19 planning meetings, and whether they've discussed using more detailed evidence by community rather than just by county?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that is a very good question because, of course, whilst the UK government extends an open invitation to the devolved administrations to take part in COBRA meetings and ministerial implementation groups, the same spirit of cooperation has not thus far been forthcoming. I was invited to one meeting by the Welsh Government ministers, but only to discuss the parts that were reserved anyway for the UK Government. So we stand ready to accept the same level of cooperation from Welsh Government that we have always extended to them in the UK Government.
Shadow Minister Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With cases rising across the UK, the First Minister has called for an extraordinary meeting of COBRA to discuss plans for a so-called circuit break lockdown. The measures are already under active consideration in Wales and will be implemented by Welsh Government if they need to be. But of course, any such measures work well and are more effective if we take them as a four-nation approach when applied across the whole of the UK. So will the government now listen to its own scientific advisers and to those of us on these benches and agree to meet with devolved nations to discuss these specific proposals?
Mr. Speaker, throughout this pandemic, the government have listened to a wide range of scientific advisers. Some of them will be advising circuit breakers, others will be suggesting that that measures are too strict. The government have listened to all, have tried to steer a course through the middle of this. They've listened to Welsh Government ministers on numerous occasions. Over 100 such meetings have taken place, and will continue to listen with an open mind and to follow the evidence.
Anna McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, unlike this Tory government in England, our Labour government in Wales does follow the science. The rules in Wales stop people from taking the virus with them from high to low prevalence areas, protecting people's lives. We want the same for visitors to Wales from across the rest of the UK where rates are even higher. So why is it that this Tory government is ignoring the First Minister yet again, failing to stand up for the people of Wales, playing politics with people's lives?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we certainly aren't playing politics with people's lives, but the Honourable Lady will surely be aware that 25% of the workforce of Wales actually travel over to England to work there, and playing politics with people's lives potentially means looking at livelihoods as well. The reality is that we have followed the science all the way through this process, and more or less the Welsh Government have followed exactly what the UK Government are doing.
Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Lady says that we should follow the science. Well, 10 minutes ago, Public Health Wales told me that they didn't even carry out a community-level analysis prior to instigating these lockdown measures. So would my honourable friend agree with me that this virus doesn't respect county borders, and once again that all the Labour Welsh Government is doing is throttling businesses and letting down the people of North Wales?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I firstly wish my honourable friend Penbloith Happis tomorrow, and say that it is the case, of course, that this virus doesn't respect boundaries, but the UK Government does respect boundaries, and whilst I fully accept that some people may have concerns about the slightly different approach that the Welsh Government sometimes adopts in this matter, the UK Government respects devolution, respects the reality of Welsh Government, and my role as a minister is to work constructively with Welsh Government ministers. I don't at this moment wish to start playing politics and criticising them.
Number 8, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chief Secretary Treasury wrote to the Honourable Member last week to confirm he's expecting to provide £2.5 million needed for the tip repairs in Tylerstown and his constituency. The letter also clarifies he is waiting to hear further from Welsh Government on additional request to access the reserve.
Well, that was useless yet again. It's been months now that I've been asking for the money for the Rhondda. The Prime Minister wrote to me in June saying that he recognised that Wales had been particularly badly hit by Storm Dennis and that the UK Government would look seriously at any requests for funding. I'm delighted we've got the £2.5 million for the Tylerstown tip, but frankly we need £60 million to mend culverts, drains, make people's houses secure, both in Pontypridd and in the Rhondda and across the whole of RCT. Make sure you earn your money by getting us our money in the Rhondda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What a contrast to the conversation we had last week when I reported this news in, where he was charm and diplomacy itself, and yet when he gets in the chamber with an audience, he becomes a different personality. But I will remind him, just in case he forgot, what the Chief Secretary's letter actually says. Amongst other things, I'm expecting to provide the required funding. That's in relation to the Welsh Government confirming it will make a reserve claim for 2020-2021. And so this process is underway. It does require Welsh Government to come to the party too. It hasn't done so yet, and of course a lot of this is in a devolved space, so we can't just pick and choose which bits of devolution suit his particular desire to make a statement in the chamber.
Tony Antoniazzi.
Question 9, Mr. Speaker.
I think that's actually art.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 9 and 10 together. Had regular discussions with the Chancellor, and we spoke only last week. Chancellor has since announced a significant package of further job support and an additional £400 million of funding for Welsh Government, totalling 4.4.
Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tourism and hospitality is the backbone of the economy of the Gower Peninsula. My constituent Lara Jocelyn runs the King's Head in Llangennith. She is fighting to keep her family business alive. Lara runs a popular rural pub and accommodation, and like many others in Gower, this provides vital part-time jobs to local people. Why is the Secretary of State not banging on the door of the Treasury to right the wrong of the job support scheme to support independent hospitality businesses like Lara's?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady and I have similar dependence on tourism in our particular constituencies, so I understand absolutely the argument she's making about its value. But I will remind her that so far the UK taxpayers have contributed £1.1 billion by way of bounce-back loans, 490 million self-employed income support, 303 million coronavirus business interruption, £13 million worth of eat out, help out, future funding, £7 million. I would carry on, Mr. Speaker, if only you would let me. That's not to mention 401,000 employees on furlough too. The Treasury has gone above and beyond the international average and trying to get to every single business in every single area of the UK, and that includes Gower just as much as it does anywhere else.
Come on.
Mr. Speaker, for those who are able to access the government's new job support scheme, and many are locked out or deemed by the government to be in unviable jobs, a cut of a third of the wages for the low paid makes it extremely hard to pay bills and feed families. Does the Secretary of State really get this? And if so, will Welsh Office ministers fight to get a better scheme?
Thank you, Ms. Speaker. We've often in this question session talked about the fact that there will always be those in all of our constituencies who don't quite fit every single one of the intervention measures that the Chancellor has announced over the last few months. In those circumstances, of course, we want to be as flexible as possible. Of course, we want to try and find ways, either through the intervention schemes or through universal credit, to support the hardest hit families as best we can. And where there are individual examples of those gaps, then of course, if she brings them to my attention, I will do my best to address them.
Secretary of State Neil Griffith with the first of 2 questions.
Mr. Speaker, well, throughout this pandemic, Welsh businesses have done all that they can to stay open and stay trading, with so many drawing on the support grants and loans that have been so important in keeping them afloat. But as more areas of the country come under local restrictions, with trading halted or severely limited, and fears about public confidence, many businesses feel that they've absolutely maxed out on their borrowing and are worried about the future. So what plan does the government have to support these businesses that are now heavily in debt, to make sure that the burden of repayments in the coming months does not mean that they go under?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start really by expressing some confusion that on the one hand, members opposite are articulating a Welsh Government view that the existing interventions aren't strict enough, and then the Honourable Lady gets to her feet and says actually they're almost imposing undue hardship. So it's quite difficult to know exactly where they do stand on these, getting a balance right between disease control and maintaining a vibrant economy. However, what I would say to her is that each and every stage of this process, the Chancellor has been flexible and adaptable, recognised that the situation is changing often by the hour, let alone by the day or week. And the financial interventions, which up till now have been about £4.4 billion by way of barnetised contribution to Welsh Government, and you could probably double that for the other interventions which are more direct, those are the measures which we think have supported business in Wales up till now. But of course, as the circumstances change and our reaction change, so we will remain flexible.
And indeed, Mr. Speaker, we have always said that any restrictions need to be backed up with proper financial support measures for business. But to reduce the spread of the virus, it's vital also that workers who are unwell or asked to self-isolate do actually stay off work. But as hours are reduced in sectors like hospitality, an increasing number of Welsh workers will find themselves falling below the minimum weekly earnings threshold needed to qualify for statutory sick pay. To expect them to live off nothing for a fortnight is totally unacceptable. Will the Secretary of State urge the Chancellor to do the decent thing and to extend the statutory sick pay scheme to all workers?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know from my sort of personal contact with the Chancellor over the last few weeks that he's looking at all of these particular options. That's why the winter resilience measures were brought in a week or so ago, on top of all of the other measures which he has introduced and which recognise the very difficult situation so many people find themselves in. So, of course, you know, I'm not going to stand here and say we're never going to consider another option. Of course we will. We will always look at the individual circumstances, particularly of those who are hardest hit.
Let's head to Wales with Howell Williams. Howell Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to our recent meeting with various COVID funding measures being announced by his governments, sometimes seemingly haphazardly and causing some confusion. A bit for football here, a bit for the arts there. And now apparently Bayes funding for universities in Wales, even though this matter is devolved. With all that happening, will he consider publishing a regular, simple table of government's COVID funding and the consequential amounts for Wales, if there are such?
Honourable Gentleman makes a good point about universities. Of course, it is devolved and yet hugely dependent on the union effort. But in answer to his very direct question, I can give him a very direct yes.
With 14 withdrawn, Andrew Griffith.
Question number 15, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm committed to driving forward each of the growth deals in Wales, and since March have taken part in 24 meetings with representatives of Wales city and growth deals. I recently visited Carmarthen West and South Pembrokeshire constituency after approving the Pembroke Dock Marine Development, one of the many growth deal projects which will be contributing to levelling up in Wales.
The Prime Minister last week outlined how we can build back better by investing in areas like hydrogen, green energy and electric mobility. Does he agree with me that it's an opportunity for the whole United Kingdom, but particularly to put Wales at the heart of that green revolution?
Very happy to agree with that question, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's commitment last week was a game changer, quadrupling offshore wind energy by 2030, doubling the amount of support for renewables projects, £160 million support infrastructure and 1 gigawatt of new floating wind projects. This is all the clear evidence of this government's commitment to a green and resilient economic recovery from the coronavirus.
Sir.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the UK Internal Market Bill will protect seamless trade across the United Kingdom, something that will benefit people in all corners of the UK and indeed of this House. Our market access guarantee will provide certainty for Welsh businesses as the transition period ends and provide a firm foundation upon which businesses may flourish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the Minister for his answer. Obviously, in Newcastle under Lyme, the whole of Staffordshire, indeed the whole of the West Midlands, there are a number of businesses that both source and supply from Wales. These businesses need the certainty that standards will be observed and that what they produce will be able to be sold into different markets around the United Kingdom and particularly in Wales. Will you confirm that the UK Internal Market Bill will deliver on that?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can absolutely confirm that. I hope all members of this House are listening to the wise words from the Honourable Gentleman. The bill provides a vital guarantee that businesses in his constituency and in all constituencies across the UK will be able to continue to trade confidently within our internal market as the transition period ends.
John Morrison.
Number 17, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. UK Government has provided a support package to Welsh businesses and communities in recent weeks, including the Government's £30 billion plan for jobs. Our ambition remains to secure jobs, stimulate growth and provide opportunities to level up Wales.
John Morrissey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I thank the Minister for his financial support for Wales and for the devolved Welsh Government. My question is, What if the Welsh Government want to trigger further restrictions, does my right honourable friend agree that if the Welsh Government wants to go beyond government measures, which measures should ultimately be a source of last resort, then it needs to provide plans for how it will financially support the industries that will be hit as a result?
Secretary Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Lady makes a very good point, and I think that the Barnettised numbers totalling £4.4 billion so far do give Welsh Government a degree of flexibility in addressing issues if the evidence supports it in a slightly different way. And there are one or two examples of where they have introduced their own interventions courtesy of money provided by UK taxpayers. But the overriding point is that there does need to be a degree of collaboration, cooperation, which straddles all of the countries of the UK, because this is an international and a national challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like me, the Secretary of State would have welcomed the vision set out by the Prime Minister last week for expanding renewable energy, and importantly, that commitment to boosting floating offshore wind power, which represents such a big opportunity for us in Wales. So can I ask my right honourable friend if he would use his good offices to make sure now that all of the relevant players in this, the private sector developers who've got projects ready to go, Bays, the Crown Estate, which of course owns the seabed, are all on the same page working towards a shared goal so that we get decisions made in a timely way?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, absolutely. I agree with my right honourable friends and neighbours' assessment of the situation, and we were all encouraged by the Minister's comments just now in that respect. I hope, encourage him by saying I'm meeting the Crown Estate the day after tomorrow, I think it is, to discuss the potential delays, which at the moment look like being their problem, and we need to unblock that.
Come to question 19. It's a substantive to Secretary Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Frequent discussions with the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. At least 510,000 people in Wales have been directly supported by the measures we have so far put in place. However, of course, the best possible support we can provide is to get behind the national effort and public health guidelines to ensure we overcome this crisis sooner rather than later.
Let's head up to Lancashire with Rosie Cooper. Rosie Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the UK's unemployment rate at its highest level in 3 years, it's clear that many workers in Wales will need to rely on social security in order to get back on the feet. Does the Secretary of State agree that it's only fair to update legacy benefits such as job seekers allowance and employment support allowance to match the increase in universal credit that was announced earlier this year?
Thank you, Honourable Lady, for her comments. And of course, conversations I've had with DWP and indeed the Chancellor have touched on this very issue, which is why the arrangements as far as universal credit have been as flexible as they can. The effort by the Department to make sure everybody is accounted for and those who might fall into the gaps we referred to earlier on are properly looked after. That is very much uppermost in the minds of Cabinet and ministerial colleagues, and I can give her that assurance.
We now have substantive to Minister Davis from Jamie Stone. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the government are committed to to rolling out broadband across the United Kingdom, although we have much work to do. I'm pleased that 15% of premises in Wales have access to full fibre broadband, compared to only 14% in the UK as a whole. And only a fortnight ago, I was able to go out with an innovative Welsh SME, Beacons Telecom, who are helping to deliver broadband in remote and rural parts of Wales, the parts of Wales that Openreach seemingly cannot reach.
We've now got Scotland with Jamie Stone. Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, I suspect that my question will come as no surprise to you. I represent one of the most remote parts of the UK, and far too many of my constituents simply cannot get decent connectivity. Could the Minister please share his experience and his know-how with the Scottish Government so that we can get this problem sorted out?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the Scottish Government care to issue me an invitation, I stand ready to serve and offer advice such as I can. But actually, I think my advice is that there are innovative small companies out there who are able to do things that Openreach apparently can't do. And I saw an example of it in Wales. I'm sure there must be many others. But can I assure the honourable gentleman that as one who is committed to the Union, our broadband ambitions span not just Wales, but the whole of the United Kingdom, from the tip of Penzance right up to the coast of Caithness and beyond.
Number
21, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 21 and 22 together. The Government is fully committed to the constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom. Our response to the COVID-19 outbreak has clearly demonstrated the value of Wales being a part of the Union, with a package of UK Government support that frankly goes well beyond anything which the Welsh Government could offer alone. It is clear that our four nations are safer and more prosperous when we stand together.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is very good news that the Government has appointed Sir Peter to undertake a detailed review into how the quality and availability of transport infrastructure can support economic growth across the UK, as well as the quality of life across the UK. Will the Minister advise what his department's priorities are for this review in Wales?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, our priorities clearly will be better transport links, ensuring that Wales is better connected to the rest of the Union. But the ambitions for the Government go well beyond transport infrastructure. We believe that Wales is an integral part of the United Kingdom, and we want to see not just good transport links, but our historical links, our cultural links, because we believe that one is quite easily able to be proud to be Welsh and proud to be British in this union.
Final question from Sir Lane Saxby in Devon. Sir Lane Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From Ilfracombe to Exmoor in my North Devon constituency, you can see South Wales. Does my honourable friend agree that we should look at the options for better connecting these two areas to strengthen the links between our economies and ultimately the Union?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I entirely agree with what the Honourable Lady has said. This Government is going to strengthen all links within the United Kingdom. We are the Conservative and Unionist Government, and I look forward to support on all sides of the House. Thank you.
Before Prime Minister's question time, I wish to make a short statement. On Monday, in an answer to a question from the Honourable Member for Swansea West about the virtual participation in debates, the Prime Minister said, inadvertently I would accept, I defer to you and the House authorities. As the Prime Minister will know, decisions on the scope of virtual participation are for the House itself. All decisions are being made on that basis of motions moved by the Leader of the House. I know that the House of Common Service will be more than happy to facilitate virtual participation in debates if the House voted for it. And if the Government wished to pass me the power, I'm more than happy to accept it. But the decision to bring forward the relevant motion is a matter for the Prime Minister and the Government he leads, not for me and the House authorities. Right, let us get underway, Prime Minister. Shelley's for us. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. Shelley's for us.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During this pandemic, in my constituency of North West Cambridgeshire, I have seen a number of instances of ordinary citizens doing extraordinary work, helping the elderly and the vulnerable. And that has been repeated across the country in every single constituency, giving true meaning to the words community spirit. Would my right honourable friend take this opportunity not only to acknowledge this fantastic work that has been done by so many people, but also to give a huge thank you to each and every one of these unsung heroes of our country.
I thoroughly concur with my right honourable friend, and I congratulate all the volunteers for the spirit and the achievements that they have delivered for the people of this country. And I was delighted that we had a first chance to honour them in the birthday honours list at the weekend, or just some of them.
Let's come to the Leader of the Opposition, Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 11th of May, the Prime Minister said that the Government's COVID strategy, and I quote him, will be governed entirely by the science. On the 21st of September, the Government's own scientific advisors, SAGE, gave very clear advice. They said a package of interventions, including a circuit breaker, will be needed to prevent an exponential rise in cases. Why did the Prime Minister reject that advice and abandon the science?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will do whatever it takes to fight this virus and to defeat it. But since he quotes the SAGE advice, I might just remind him that on page 1 it says that all the interventions considered have associated costs in terms of health and well-being, and that policymakers will need to consider analysis of economic impacts and the associated harms alongside this epidemiological assessment. And the advice that I have today, Mr. Speaker, is that if we do the regional approach that commended itself to the House and indeed to the right honourable gentleman on Monday, Mr. Speaker, we can bring down the R and we can bring down the virus. So will he stick to his position of Monday and support that approach?
Keir Starmer.
I don't think that approach goes far enough, and neither does Sage. And the Prime Minister talks of the costs. Since he rejected Sage's advice on the 21st of September, I remind him, the R rate has gone up. The infection rate has quadrupled. Hospital admissions have gone from 275 a day to 628 a day in England. Yesterday, 441 COVID patients were on ventilators, and the number of deaths recorded was tragically the highest since June the 10th. That's the cost of rejecting the advice. Sage has a clear view on why that's happening. What's the Prime Minister's view on why these numbers are all heading in the wrong direction?
Mr. Speaker, I set that out very clearly in the House on Monday, and the difference between this stage of the pandemic and March and April, as the House knows very well, is that the disease is appearing much more strongly in some parts of the country than in others. And in Liverpool, for instance, alas, the figures are now running at 670 cases per 100,000 against 33 cases per 100,000 in Cornwall, 540 cases per 100,000 in Newcastle, alas, against 32 in Norfolk. And that is why the tiered approach, the three-tiered approach that we set out on Monday and that he then supported is the right way forward. And we want to put in the most stringent measures necessary in the places where the virus is surging in order to get it down where it is surging, Mr. Speaker. That is the logical thing to do. So will he get on to his Labour friends in those parts of the north of England where we want to work with them to put those very stringent measures in place in order to deliver the reductions that the whole country wants to see? Will he support those measures? Because he wouldn't support them last night, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Prime Minister's behind the curve again. He probably hasn't noticed that this morning the council leaders in Greater Manchester that he's just quoted, including the Mayor and including the Conservative leader of Bolton Council, have said in a press statement that they support a circuit break above Tier 3 restrictions. Keep up, Prime Minister. The big problem the Prime Minister has, and it's from the Sage minutes that make it absolutely clear that his two main policies, track and trace and local restrictions, simply haven't worked. And we can't stand by. In June, the Prime Minister told me that track and trace would play a vital part in ensuring that we do not have a second spike this winter. His words. 3 months later, Sage have concluded that track and trace, their words, is only having a marginal impact on transmission. They go on to say, and this is the really worrying part, that this is likely to further decline in the future. Further decline. So let's not have the usual nonsense that anyone asking the Prime Minister a question about track and trace is somehow knocking the NHS. This is Sage's assessment, the government's own advisers. So after £12 billion, let's have a straight answer. Why does the Prime Minister think that his track and trace system has gone so wrong?
Mr. Speaker, it's thanks to NHS Test and Trace that is now testing more people than any other country in Europe that we know where the disease is surging, and we know that it is regionally distributed rather than nationally distributed at the moment, and that gives us a chance now to do the right thing. He wants to close pubs, he wants to close bars, he wants to close businesses in areas across the country where the incidence is low, and that's what he wants to do, and he wants to do it now, and yet he voted to do nothing last night, nothing in the areas where the incidence is highest, Mr. Speaker. He says one thing at 5 o'clock about calling for a national lockdown. When it came to a vote in this House of Commons, Mr. Speaker, to impose more stringent measures, he failed even to turn up.
Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I know that for someone who's been an opportunist all his life, this is difficult to understand. But having read and considered the sage advice, I have genuinely concluded that a circuit break is in the national interest. Genuinely concluded. Mr. Speaker, it's the failure of the Prime Minister's strategy that means tougher measures are now unavoidable. That's Sage's view. Sage has advised that a circuit breaker should act to reduce R below 1, should reset the incidence of disease to a lower level, and should set the epidemic back by approximately 28 days or more. All three are vital, and that's why Labour backs it. So can the Prime Minister tell us what is his alternative plan to get R below 1? R below 1.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the plan is the plan that the right honourable gentleman supported on Monday. And the whole point, Mr. Speaker, is to seize this moment now to avoid the misery of another national lockdown into which he wants to go headlong by delivering a regional solution. And, Mr. Speaker, opportunism is, I'm afraid, the name of the game for the party opposite, because they backed the rule of 6, or he backed the rule of 6, and then refused to vote for it. I think at 3 o'clock, Mr. Speaker, the Shadow Health spokesman said that a national lockdown would be disastrous. At 5 o'clock, he was calling for it, Mr. Speaker. Let's go back to the approach that he was supporting on Monday. Let's try to avoid the misery of another national lockdown, which he would want to impose, as I say, in a headlong way. And let's work together. Let's work together, as he was prepared to do on Monday, to keep kids in school, who he would now yank out of school in a peremptory way, keep our economy going, and keep jobs and livelihoods supported in this country, Mr. Speaker. And let's take the commonsensical regional approach, and will he kindly spell out to all his colleagues across the whole of the country that that is the best way forward, as indeed he did on Monday.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, following the advice is now apparently opportunistic. Presumably he'll say the same to the leader of Bolton Council, a Conservative leader, who this morning said he supports a circuit break. Mr. Speaker, I've just listened to what the Prime Minister said about his strategy to get R below 1. But I can't think of a single scientist who backs him. He will know that the Chief Medical Officer said on Monday that his words, Chief Medical Officer, not confident, nor is anyone confident, that the Tier 3 proposals for the highest rate would be enough. That's Tier 3. That's Tier 3, the highest tier. So why is the Prime Minister so confident that his approach will get the R rate below 1? So confident? Or is that no longer the government plan?
I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, he is misrepresenting the position. Doubtless inadvertently, what our advice is that if the regional measures at Tier 3 at all levels were implemented in full, with the support and the active cooperation of local leaders, as indeed we have seen from the leader of Liverpool City Region, and I pay tribute to him and I thank him for what he is doing. If we saw full and proper enforcement, if they were able to conduct proper local test and trace with the support of the £500 million that we're giving, then yes, those measures would deliver, Mr. Speaker, the reduction in the R locally, regionally that we need in order to avert what none of us want to see, except now the right honourable gentleman having performed this extraordinary U-turn, none of us want to see, and that is the disaster, the words of the Shadow Health spokesman, of a national lockdown. We don't want to go there. We want the regional approach. He should cooperate with it.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I've supported the government in all their measures so far, and I've taken criticism of it. But I think this measure is wrong, and a circuit breaker is in the national interest. I've read the advice of Sage, and the government has rejected it. Mr. Speaker, this is my last question, and I'm sure the Prime Minister has his pre-prepared rant ready as usual. But we're at a tipping point. Time is running out. maybe can seize the moment and answer a question. This morning, the Telegraph quotes senior government sources saying the chances of the Prime Minister backing a circuit break in the next 2 weeks are about 80%. Is that right? And if it is, why doesn't he do it now, save lives, fix testing and protect the NHS?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is a right honourable gentleman who claims to be supporting the government one day and then performs a dramatic U-turn the next. Everybody, Mr. Speaker, he claims to support the rule of six one day, then pulls his support the next. He wants tough measures and then refuses to vote for them. Everybody, Mr. Speaker, can see what he's doing. Labour have said it themselves. They see this, Mr. Speaker, as a good crisis for the Labour Party and one they wish to exploit. We see this as a national crisis that we are going to turn around. And the way we're going to do it, Mr. Speaker, the way we're going to do it, and I rule out nothing, of course, in combating the virus. But we are going to do it with the local, the regional approach that can drive down and will drive down the virus if it is properly implemented. And that is what I believe he should be supporting. He said he'd support it on Monday, Mr. Speaker. This is our opportunity to keep things going, to keep our kids in school, to keep our businesses going. That, I think, is what the people of this country want to do. This is our opportunity to do that and to suppress the virus where it is surging. He refuses to accept that approach today. I hope that not for the first time, Mr. Speaker, he will change his mind and think the better of his actions.
Mr. Speaker, one of the great unsung achievements of the coalition government was the recruitment of 4,200 extra health visitors. Now, as an experienced father himself, the PM knows how vital baby-to-baby contact is, as well as support networks for new parents. Yet lockdown has made that difficult, and at a time when they are most needed, health visitor numbers have dwindled and they've been diverted from face-to-face contact. So will the Prime Minister urgently look at reversing the decline in health visitors and support the parent-infant premium proposal by the Parent-Infant Foundation to help lockdown babies catch up?
Yes.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend who's not only an experienced father himself, but also, of course, an experienced campaigner on this issue. And I'm very pleased that health visiting teams have continued throughout this crisis to prioritise vulnerable families, and that is what they're going to do throughout the winter and throughout the pandemic.
Let's head to Scotland with the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the founder of Brewdog warned the end of the job retention scheme will lead to a tsunami of unemployment. Brewdog is just one of thousands of businesses across Scotland and the United Kingdom demanding that the Tory government U-turn on its reckless plans to scrap the furlough scheme. There are just 2 weeks left to save people's jobs and livelihoods. So, Prime Minister, in the next fortnight, you have two choices. Extend the full furlough scheme or inflict a tsunami of unemployment on our people this winter. What is the Prime Minister going to choose?
Prime Minister. Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman. As he knows, the Chancellor's already unveiled the job support system scheme, which will go through till next year. And for those on low incomes, they will also have the additional benefit of universal credit, which again is going through in its uplifted form, 1,000 extra per year through to next April, at least.
Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
My goodness, Mr. Speaker, that answer really does just show that the Prime Minister doesn't get it. Universal credit, is that really what the Prime Minister is saying to those that could be saved? People don't want to hear of these boasting and the excuses that we get. They want action. And these half measures don't cover it. Thousands have already lost their jobs. The ONS has confirmed the highest rate of redundancies since 2009. We're heading towards a Tory winter of mass unemployment created by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. We know what the Prime Minister's Tory colleagues are saying. The Prime Minister's next job could be on the back benches. He just doesn't know it yet. If the Prime Minister won't U-turn on his plans to scrap furlough, does he realise he will never, not ever be forgiven for the damage he's just about to cause to people up and down Scotland?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I say, and I've said many times to the right honourable gentleman, this government is continuing to support people across the whole of the UK. Many billions of pounds in Barnet consequentials, at least £5 billion in Barnet consequentials for Scotland alone. And but one thing I will congratulate him on is the Scottish Nationalist Party's support for the tiered approach, which I think is still their policy, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the party opposite, at least they're showing some vestige of consistency in their normal gelatinous behaviour.
Let's head over to Hendon with Dr. Matthew Offord. Dr. Matthew Offord.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, I met virtually with the Hendon Cladding Collective to discuss building safety. The EWS1 form was raised as this was designed to support residential valuation and lending on buildings over 18 metres. However, the consolidated advice notes issued by the Department for Housing, Communities and Local Government extended the scope of this form to buildings below 18 metres. Will the Prime Minister provide specific interim advice around risk prioritisation of buildings below 18 metres? And will he also extend the Building Safety Fund to buildings of less than 18 metres?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'll look at the second point that the honourable gentleman, my honourable friend, raises. But what I can tell him is that we're obviously focusing first on the buildings that are over 18 metres with unsafe cladding. But I understand that the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors is producing a risk matrix to support mortgage valuation under 18 metres, and led by the National Fire Chiefs Council, a risk prioritisation tool for blocks of flats will be available shortly.
Colin Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By the weekend, Northern Ireland will be in an effective lockdown. Under the Chancellor's new furlough scheme starting in November, a minimum wage full-time employee, a normal worker, would be entitled to £227 per week. I doubt this Prime Minister could survive on that. How in under God does he expect ordinary decent workers to survive on it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of what this government has done to raise the national living wage, which this government introduced. But what I can tell them is that whatever happens, a combination of the job support scheme and universal credit will mean that nobody gets less than 93% of their current income.
Mr. Speaker, my constituency of Anismorn has the best nuclear site in the UK. Will the Prime Minister confirm to me and the people of Anismorn that he is 100% behind Wilverknowitt?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate her on her fantastic campaigning for a nuclear future for Anismorn, and she has no more fervent supporter in that objective than me.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Communities Secretary has a habit of hitting the headlines, not always for the right reason. At the weekend, we discovered that his constituency had been awarded £25 million for a regeneration scheme, and that was approved by one of his own ministers. The Secretary of State returned the favour by approving funding for that minister's constituency. We have one department, two ministers, and tens of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money. Does the Prime Minister think that this approval process is appropriate, or does he actually think that the public might be right in thinking this all looks a bit grubby?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, all this was independently approved, but if he has some serious allegation to make against my right honourable friend, then I suggest that he has the guts to make it.
Craig Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, British wool is a multifunctional, versatile product, but sadly farmers across the UK and indeed Montgomeryshire feel frustrated that this highly sustainable natural product is not properly valued and utilised to its full potential at the moment. Can I ask the Prime Minister to help boost the export market, or indeed our domestic demand for British wool as we build back better? For example, use the wool as a great insulator for the next generation of sustainable housing.
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for what he does to campaign for wool, and as someone whose family used to farm sheep, I feel the pain of sheep farmers everywhere, wool farmers everywhere. The price is on the floor at the moment, Mr. Speaker. Uses such as the one my honourable friend identifies, I think are indeed extremely interesting and should be pursued. And I urge everybody in this country thinking of Christmas presents to buy British wool this winter.
Neil Coyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister told me he would support charities to be able to open COVID-safe accommodation for homeless people this winter. But yesterday, the government announced a £3 million cut in the cold weather fund this year, despite higher COVID-related costs. Will the Prime Minister at least guarantee that all government funds can be used to cover anyone and everyone needing shelter?
Prime Minister. Of course, Mr. Speaker, we will make sure that local authorities get the support that they need, and as he knows, we've already put an extra £3.7 billion into helping local authorities, and I think a total of £28 billion into tackling the local consequences of COVID, and we will continue to support people throughout the country.
Let's head to the southwest with Sigurry Street. Sigurry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May I strongly support the aspiration of the Prime Minister set out last week to deliver floating offshore wind capacity of 1 gigawatt by 2030. Is my right honourable friend aware that there is a very substantial scheme being worked up in the Celtic Sea that would meet a third of this target, as well as creating many jobs in South Wales and Devon and Cornwall? Would he please use his best endeavours to ensure that the Crown Estate looks favourably upon this project to help our country deliver its important climate change commitments?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm aware of the incredible prospects in the Celtic Sea, and I'm confident that the Crown Estate, as the landlord of the seabed, will respond positively.
Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Luke Thomas has recently been diagnosed with terminal cancer. He urgently needs to move closer to his family for support. Luke has a shared ownership flat in a low-rise building with wooden cladding, but he can't sell it because mortgage lenders require an EWS1 certificate and Luke's building does not have one. Estimates suggest it could take 10 years to certify every building affected, but Luke and hundreds of thousands of people like him cannot wait that long. When will the Prime Minister end this scandal?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I direct the honourable lady to what I said just a moment or two ago to my honourable friend about trying to provide mortgage backing for those who find themselves in that very difficult position. But we must get on and remove the cladding, the flammable cladding from buildings of all kinds.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ashfield and Eastwood has been left behind, ignored and forgotten about after decades of Labour-run councils and Labour MPs. Last December, my friends, family and constituents voted for change. They want to see the glory days return to Ashfield and Eastwood, which was once the beating heart of Nottinghamshire through mining, textiles and engineering. Can my right honourable friend please reassure me that Ashfield and Eastwood will no longer be the forgotten constituency, and that he will do all he can to make sure we get the investment we need to secure better jobs, better education, better training and a better future?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell my honourable friend, who is a fantastic campaigner for Ashfield, that they are in line for the town deal proposals as part of the £3.6 billion town deals fund and the £250 million growth deals announced through to 2021. And I hope he'll take that good news back to Ashfield.
Let's head up to Scotland with Alan Dorrans. Alan Dorrans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has been asked this question before by my SNP colleagues and others, but they have never received a direct response. I will therefore ask the Prime Minister again. Will he confirm that the temporary £20 universal credit uplift will be made permanent after April next year, and that those who are currently excluded from the uplift will be included?
Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that I've given that answer many times, and that's because the answer remains the same, which is that the uplift will remain in place through to April next year. And as I said, when you combine the JSS with UC, people get 93% of their income. I appreciate that times are tough, but the best thing we can do, Mr. Speaker, is keep this economy moving if we possibly can, keep our kids in school, and avert the disaster Labour's words, Mr. Speaker, the disaster of another national lockdown.
Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking the great businesses of Wolverhampton, like Greg at GI Barbers and Baked in Technol, for continuing to serve the community in difficult times? Would he also reconfirm his commitment to invest and level up Wolverhampton? And when we've come through this stronger, can I invite him to come and see them businesses himself?
Prime Minister.
Well, I have happy memories, Mr. Speaker, of sampling some of the fare in Wolverhampton with my honourable friend, and I can tell him that the Black Country City deal has just seen an investment of 5.8 million, and that the West Midlands Combined Authority was just awarded £66 million for projects across the area, including £15 million for the National Brownfield Institute that is due to be located in Wolverhampton. And Wolverhampton, Mr. Speaker, was the birthplace of the first industrial revolution. It is now teeming with opportunity in the latest.
Let's go to Northern Ireland with Gregory Campbell. Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware the Northern Ireland Executive have just announced new restrictions to bear down on the virus, while still keeping schools open, with the exception of one extra week at Halloween, and keeping most sectors of the economy going. But the sectors that are missing are hospitality, the associated supply chains, and self-employed. What plans does he have to announce something to help these much-needed sectors that are in dire need and need assistance urgently?
Prime Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman, and I am in continuous contact, as he can imagine, both with the leader and the deputy leader in Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland, of course, will receive at least £2.4 billion in additional funding as a result of Barnett consequentials, but we will look at further measures, further imaginative and creative measures to support jobs, to support livelihoods across the whole of the UK.
Herb Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This Sunday marks the 11th day of the Anti-Slavery Day for the United Kingdom, an opportunity for all of us to raise awareness of the heinous crime of modern slavery. Would my right honourable friend use this opportunity to reinforce the UK's global leadership on this issue? And can he confirm that the treating victims with dignity and respect will always be at the heart of everything this government does in response to this crime?
Prime Minister.
Yes, I certainly can confirm what my right honourable says about treating victims with dignity and respect, and she's right to take pride in what this government has done in introducing the Modern Slavery Act. And thanks to that act, we're identifying more victims, Mr. Speaker, of modern slavery than ever before. 10,000 potential victims of modern slavery identified in 2019. That is a 52% increase. It is this government, this House and this country that is leading the campaign against modern slavery.
Wendy Champlin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I entered Parliament this morning and I checked in using the contact tracing app. And when I return to Fife on the train tomorrow, I will need to manually switch to the Scottish app, as it doesn't happen automatically. We're facing a second wave of infections across the UK, so test and trace is even more critical. So given the Prime Minister's support for a four nations approach, can I ask the Prime Minister what engagement has taken place on app interoperability, because that's critical, particularly in border communities?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable lady for pointing that out. I will make sure that there is interoperability. I will do what I can to ensure there's interoperability across all four nations. There is a slightly different approach, as she knows, in Northern Ireland already. But in the bulk of our approach, we have so far taken, there is much more in common than sets us apart.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the government's commitment to establish free ports. And the port of Immingham in my constituency is by tonnage the largest port in the country. Would the Prime Minister agree that it would be somewhat remiss not to include Immingham in the free port programme?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank him for his campaigning for Immingham. It's registered, but Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend should know that he is one of the most successful campaigners in this House already this year, because the new bridge that he asked for at Suggett's Lane Crossing, the new bridge that he asked for, is going to be completed between the summer and the autumn of next year, Mr. Speaker, so you can carry that back in triumph to Suggett's Lane.
We now head up to Scotland with Anne McLaughlin. Anne McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My lovely 88-year-old constituent Mary feels foolish for falling for it. She's talking about being missold Greendale products by Helms, a government-approved company, in 2013. She's talking about being saddled with a 25-year loan, which she must live to 106 to pay off. At the speed with which the complaints are being dealt with by Bays, I'll be 106 by the time we get any kind of resolution. Will the Prime Minister please commit to investigating why Mary, who's watching now, and hundreds of others are waiting years to be compensated for something that happened not because they were foolish, but because they were victims of mis-selling?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm afraid to say what the honourable lady raises is incredibly important, and she's right to raise it, and we must accelerate the process by which these complaints are upheld and dealt with, and compensation is delivered, if only because that is the only way to build public confidence in all the retrofitting, all the insulation, all the improvements to our homes that we need to deliver across the whole of the country as part of our green industrial revolution. So she is spot on, and I'll be writing to her about that case.
Point of order.
Point of order, John Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the remote participation bill that stands in my name, that was due to have its second reading on Friday, which was originally tabled by the member for Swansea West, in light of your comments earlier today, can you please advise me how best we can ensure that remote participation bill becomes a reality for this House?
First of all, can I say I'm grateful for giving notice of the point of order. Her decision to defer the second reading of her bill and the government's policy position on the provisions it may contain are not matters for the chair, as you are aware. But in making her point of order, she has placed her hopes on record, and I'm sure that it will be listened to on the Treasury bench, and I do have sympathy, but unfortunately it is not for my decision. Okay. Right, let us now get to, in order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business, the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order. Now come to presentation bill, Peter Hobhouse.
All ethnic minority shortlists bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 12th of March.
Friday the 12th of March. Thank you. Right. Let's begin to start with the next part. We come to the 10-minute rule bill. We've got Andrew Rosendahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to establish rights to keep dogs and other animals in domestic accommodation, to make provision about the protection and welfare of dogs and other animals, and for connected purposes. Mr. Speaker, what makes somewhere a home is something where special moments are created, living with a family, friends, or companions. Moving into a new home is a normal part of life. But what if every time you moved, you faced the threat of being separated from someone you loved? Can a house or a flat ever really be a home if you have been forced